Hi everybody. So this is a quick Q&A clinic session. I've been asking people to pose some questions over the past week or so, and this is what we have. So let's start with Rob B, who asks, could you please do a quick review of the major 4 to minor 4 modulation? Okay, first of all, not all chromatic chords are modulations, right? It's a bit of a grey area, but generally a modulation is held to be a move to a new key centre. And this often happens in the B section of a tune and is usually signalled by a massive 2-5-1 or something. So for instance, we're in key of D flat major in Body and Soul. And we move to D major. And technically, actually, if I'm going to be a complete boffin about it, the way it works is that a modulation actually refers to the process by which you move to a new key, right? Okay, rather than move to a new key itself. But most people say modulation to mean key change. So that's not really a key change. What it is a kind of a major-minor modal interchange. So very often in tonal music, like not just jazz, including classical music as well, you'll have chords that are actually belonging to the minor chord swapped into the major key. So minor key, swapped into the major key. So for instance, if you're playing in C major, you might have some chords from C minor, for instance. That's where the F minor comes from, and also the B flat 7 for the backdoor progression, which is very closely related. Now, actually, in fact, the only note that's chromatic in the 4 minor. So, by the way, if I'm talking about C major, I'm talking about F, right? So F major to F minor. That's just one note different, which is moving an A to an A flat. In practice, actually, I think people tend to play F minor over it, F melodic minor or F Dorian most commonly. So an F minor 6th usually. So you can play like... it's a really common chord progression. So for instance, or even... a nice example from Cole Porter. Strange the change from major to minor every time you say, every time you say goodbye, or a non-pop example. Don't back in anger. I can't sing in that key. Don't back in anger. I heard you say, for instance, or. He's a real nowhere man, which is probably where Oasis got it from the Beatles. So this is like a classic songwriting move. There's nothing particularly jazz about that, but that sort of swap from major to minor is really common in sort of 90s pop. If you listen to any 90s pop song, sort of like particularly Britpop stuff. Thinking here of... for some reason, I've been listening a lot to the Manic Street Preachers recently, and they often have this minor modal interchange. For instance, it's 2-5-1. Then they borrow a chord from minor. Okay, yeah. See, so it's got 2-5-1s and minor. What I'm trying to say is that stuff is not. That, by the way, is Peter Bernstein voicing that James Dean Bradfield's playing there. Preferred voicing for a major 7th. After Minish. So there you go. And I think they might have got that from John Barry as well as the Beatles. And John Barry was originally a big band arranger. He started off life doing that, which is no surprise when you listen to the James Bond music. It's a sound. It's an intrinsic sound of the major 6th diminished scale, Barry Harris. So we have the A flat in there. So these chords all belong to that. And wherever we got flat 6, it's related to other similar chords. So for instance, in the case of F minor 6th in the major key, I've already talked about C major. I've already talked about B flat 7. Sharp 11th is common because often you have a major 3rd in the melody. Well, I'm talking about the key. So the 3rd degree of C major being E on top of a B flat 7 backdoor chord is really common, for instance in Cherokee. So when you do the when you move that note, the A to an A flat, you also have moving 2 to a 2 half diminished chord, or flat 6th major, which is the night and day. And in that case, as with the B flat, you get a flat 7th as well, a flat 3rd actually in this chord. So it's like much more of a kind of swapping minor into major thing. Okay, but you could just like keep all the notes the same as flat 6th, like that. That's a really beautiful one. They all kind of function in a similar sort of way. It just adds a bit of sophistication, like a bit of intrigue to the major key, which is why John Barry loved it, obviously. Thing is that like the major key is utterly bland, so it's great to have a bit of sophistication in there. I think we can probably say Brahms, Johannes Brahms, was the daddy of using this particular note to create intrigue. So that's where that comes from, soloing over it. Listen to the records. So the next question is from Tom Woodhouse, and it's: I have an issue with getting in the zone. It happened on gigs when they were still a thing, and when practicing tunes, and that sometimes I get in the zone and new interesting ideas come out when I'm playing music and concepts, and sometimes I feel like I'm just filling time with scales, arpeggios, licks, etc. It's almost like I'm not improvising, just relying on preconceived things I've worked out on that get boring very quickly. The answer to that is I don't care. And neither does your audience. The thing is that I think we're all far too obsessed with our internal processes as musicians. It's utterly boring to everybody else. You're a musician, your job is to play music and to entertain people. You often get this situation where you play a gig and you think, well, that was utterly boring, I didn't feel anything at all. And then somebody will run up to you and say, wow, I was so moved by that, that was so great. And you're like, you have to get out of your head and you have to not go, well, it's a load of bloody rubbish, wasn't it? And actually say something like, oh, that's great. Oh, it's fantastic. You enjoyed that. I really appreciate you coming up and saying something. It's makes it all worthwhile, or, whatever. People want to believe that you're feeling what they're feeling. Okay. So don't disabuse them of that notion. Very important. It's called showbiz. Okay. We don't like to talk about showbiz in jazz, but have a look at, any of the great jazz artists of the 1920s and 1930s, bebop players, people, the Blue Note musicians, like Art Blakey's jazz messengers, all dressed up to the nines. Even Miles Davis in the 1970s wearing crazy outfits. And tell me that's not showbiz, because it is showbiz. Mahavishnu Orchestra, showbiz, okay? Apparently John McLaughlin played pretty much the same solos every night. And, that was the show, okay? So I think we're far too obsessed with all of this stuff. Now, of course, by taking the pressure off yourself to come up with important new music all the time, you can probably actually create a space where you might be a bit more creative. So my advice is just to not worry about it. I'm going to come back to this theme of cultivating difference between practice and performance. Performance, you don't really want to have too much going on up here. You want to go to the land of Obladi, really. And improvisation can be a part of that, but you might end up unwittingly playing pretty much the same solo every night if it works. There's loads of stories about jazz musicians playing pretty much the same solo every night. It's a bit of a myth that you have to make everything up from whole cloth right away. That's how Steve Swallow puts it. So the other thing is that your licks might not be boring to the audience. They might be boring to you because you've been listening to them for hours a day. But actually, imagine if you went to, obviously he's dead now, but went to hear B.B. King and he didn't do that. Or imagine if you went to, it was also dead, unfortunately, but imagine if you went to hear Eddie Van Halen and he didn't do this. Or if Wes didn't do, sometimes the things that you do that you find utterly boring are the things that people find utterly unique and captivating about you, all right? So don't be silly. Okay, next question. Typing hazard. Says, I have this weird problem where I can't play new lines on old tunes. Like I say, I've known a tune for 10 years, and I say I've been practicing all kinds of things over the last few years. I've seen on your channel. Things I learned from Barry Harris, great channel, by the way. Christian Van Hemert, also a great channel. Also much higher production values than me. Etc., etc. But my lead ideas are always sort of stuck in the way that I used to think about the song. I can't seem to naturally update my improv on old tunes with new tricks. Is that weird? No. Is there a solution? Maybe. Am I doomed? Almost certainly, but not for that reason. Okay, so I think here's the thing. It's kind of related to the last thing. I mean, if you play a nice version of the song, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, right? If it's nice, just leave it alone. If you want to get new ideas for a tune, you can reharmonize it, try new chords with it. You can change the key. Very often on the guitar, I find just playing it in a new position really helps. Simple things like that. Just anything to bust you out of your rut. Now, I'm going to go a little bit Yoda. So while there is one on the on the whole, it's a bad idea to try things. It's actually quite useful to try not to do things. So it's do, what was it again? Do not, or try not, there is no try. Yeah. Hopefully I got that right, Star Wars nerds. So, yeah, that's useful advice. Trying not to do something, going, well, I always play that lick at the start of the solo, so let's try and do something different. That's something that's quite valid to think about when you're performing. Thinking, oh, I've got to play this lick that I was practicing today is not so useful because you'll generally trip yourself up. Okay? So I just try reharmonizing different keys, different positions on the guitar can really help. Just try doing things a bit differently. Try arranging something. Arranging and composition are a really good window into improvisation, because if you improvise, you probably tend to paradoxically play the stuff that you always play, whereas if you compose or arrange something new, it might help entrench or internalize new vocabulary in your playing. This, by the way, relates to something that Paul McAvoy asks, which is, I have ideas now that I didn't have before, but they kind of come out stuttering, and when something is just slightly out of reach, my swing drops and everything gets really choppy and out of time. How can I reach for stuff and push myself and still swing and play with good rhythm, or do I just need to internalize these ideas, but then it's sort of hard to push myself while performing? So first thing I'd say is, I don't think you can push yourself when performing. I think sometimes you can get up on stage and play, stuff that you haven't practiced, new ideas. You're not just the sum total of your practice, but most nights you are, to be honest with you. I think if that happens, it's an external force. I don't want to sound all metaphysical, but the external force comes into you and you are able to play. And the more open you are to that, to sort of connect to what Tom Woodhouse said earlier, the more you are going to find that you are able to let that creative spirit in. But the problem is, and spirits, and by the way, the old meaning of the word genius was that it was literally like a genie, like a sort of, the Greeks had the term daemon, I think it's daimon, I'm try to pronounce it, which of course now is associated with evil, but back in that time was just understood to be basically a spirit, okay, that would enter you, like a genius, as the Roman Latin word, and would inhabit you and make you do cool things, Literally, that's how they viewed the world, and that's very common throughout the world. There's similar ideas in African cultures, for instance. It's an older understanding of what genius is, and I think more helpful for the artist than the idea of genius being a possession, which is an Enlightenment concept. I think it started with Dalton, if I remember correctly. So the old meaning of genius, as in something that inhabits you, is very, very helpful in that respect. You need to make space for that genius to inhabit you. It's throughout our language. It's really interesting. Like zeitgeist, for instance, time spirit, the spirit of the times. So thinking of creativity as an external force rather than an internal one is more helpful, I find. So don't push yourself live, and just try and not place massive expectations on your performance. In terms of internalizing language, it's good if you internalize it in terms of your ears as well. So, for instance, here's a good exercise from Hal Galper. I'm playing a little Barry Harris exercise, which I haven't really got under my fingers. So I'm just going around, I'm demonstrating it very well, I'm just going around and I'm sort of singing and playing and singing and playing and singing and playing and trying to put the two things together, because if you can sing something and also have it in your fingers, it's much more likely to come out in your playing. If you try and make things come out in your playing, yes, your swing will become choppy, And I don't want to sound like I'm like, oh yes, here I am sitting on the mountain all enlightened and everything, because I really am not. That stuff that Paul McAvoy's talking about happens to me all the flipping time. And I can hear it on recordings, I can hear it on stuff I posted on the channel, and it drives me up the wall. But at least I know what the solution is. Silencing that inner monologue, which is like, why don't you play the thing you've been practicing, is a lot harder. Okay, Alfonso Souza asks the following. I always strive for an organic and free kind of writing, but I've been noticing recently. Okay, so I won't read out the whole thing because it's quite a long thing. Basically, Alfonso Souza is asking about whether it's good that he composes asymmetrical, like 23 bar, 29 bar structures, as opposed to, neat AABA forms, 32 bar, powers of 4, or powers of 2, very common in musical structure in Western music. And the answer is it's fine. I honestly think you just got to compose to your own satisfaction. If you think it sounds good, then it's fine. And then, it's always a leap of faith, then to take that music out and sort of present it to other people and then say, do you like it? The amazing thing is it ever works at all, to be honest. I sort of sit here and I write pieces that I like the sound of, and then other people like the sound of them too, sometimes. It's a leap of faith. It really is. The internal landscape of the musician doesn't necessarily have much to do with the external landscape of the musician. The thing is, though, is you need to kind of make the audience think that there is a link, because it's the fiction that we're all sold on. We love stories about people like Christian Bale shouting at grips because they're in character, We love all that stuff, We don't like to hear about a cold technical actor just going, I don't know, Ian McKellen or somebody just like being really, really great at acting. So they just go like, simply act, dear, and then you do the acting, and then all your technique. So it comes across as completely convincing. By the way, if you've ever seen anybody doing technical acting in front of you, it's amazing. Like, they literally become another person, and yet it's all just done through precise control. Actors are brilliant. I love actors. Anyway, sorry, I digress. Yeah, so what was I talking about? It's fine. Irregular forms. Often music which is non-harmonic. You might want to listen to Middle Eastern and North African music, for instance, that has irregular forms. My good friend Shirley Smart often writes pieces that are irregular. Sometimes they have like a random bar of 2 in, stuff like that. And they need it because that's the form of the tune, and it wouldn't sound right if it wasn't there. And I remember having a similar sort of discussion with her, although I think she's much more like confident. She's like, yeah, that's the way it's going to be. If I take that bar of 2 out, it doesn't sound right. And the bar of 2 is my favourite thing in it. So if it sounds good to you, it is good. Everything else is technique. You might want to get used to writing a sort of AABA song in 32 bars just to get used to how that works. But I wouldn't worry about it too much. I don't know. I have no idea how your compositions sound, so I can't really judge them myself. Most composition lessons take either the form of, really kind of technical exercises like, writing fugues and minuets and things and harmony exercises, or they are literally just suggestions, or like, I hear this, have you thought about doing this? Anyway, a channel like David Bruce's is an absolute storehouse of information on how to go about composition, so I would certainly check his channel out for more information. I don't think necessarily I'm the best person qualified to comment on the craft of composition, but I think the process is clear. Don Fraser asks, I have a pretty good handle on Barry Harris's added note concept, but wondering about the scales of chords and how to apply them to tunes. Right, so in general, it's always a good idea if you apply anything you learn to tunes, because that way you'll get into your playing quicker, and it won't just be like a bunch of, exercises. I just want to show you an example from What Is This Thing Called Love. So the changes to What Is This Thing Called Love go G minor 7 flat 5, C7 altered, and F minor 6th, right? And then it does D minor 7 flat 5, G7 altered, C6. Okay, so in this case, there's a simple way of doing it, there's a slightly more complex way of doing it. All the major 6th and minor 6th diminished scales, both of them, and these are the main ones that you need to learn. The dominant diminished scale doesn't sound particularly great, according to Barry Harris himself, and the 7 flat 5 is a little bit more advanced. It's a great sound, but I can't say I've got to grips with it yet, so I'd be pretentious to teach it, really. But I would say, like, if you learn those two, then within each of those is its own like minor 2/5. So for instance, the minor sixth diminished obviously includes these notes as a harmonic minor scale would, and then also the minor sixth chord itself. So you can take like the diminished chords and then resolve it to F minor sixth. You'll notice I'm just using some borrowed notes in the soprano there to make it a little bit more interesting. Things like this I'll make as well. So and then that's nice. Okay, and then the same for the major. So this is again like minor 2/5 going to C major. Same thing again. So I'm using borrowed notes just to make it sound a little bit less, you know, bit less gypsy jazzish in an obvious way. So I think that's really a good way to apply it. Now, if you want to get a bit more complex, you can start to involve the minor sixth related to each chord. So, for instance, the G minor 7 flat 5 relates to a B flat minor sixth chord. It's the same thing. So you can use that scale and look out for common tones. So now we're going to move to D flat minor sixth diminished, which is the altered sort of relationship with C7. It's the same as chord scale theory, right? Just use the minor sixth diminished instead of the use the minor sixth diminished instead of the melodic minor. Okay, there's common tone there. Yeah, and then we go. Sorry, I'm remembering what chord we're on. Oh yeah, and then go to, and then that one. Yeah, so. You know, you can look for them in, other notes. And then, so this one, for instance. And then let's do this one. So this is D minor 7 flat 5. That relates to F minor 6. So F minor 6 diminished. It's the same thing again, in a different key. So play around with things like that. Just like each tune. I mean, not every tune is all just like 2/5/1s, but like the fact that 2/5/1s come from inside the scale kind of makes that a bit easier, if that makes any sense. And it makes most sense to explore these ideas on chords that stick around for a while. The relationships you need to know are for the minor sixth diminished, knowing that it relates to a minor 7 flat 5 chord or a half diminished chord, a minor third down, and for the major sixth diminished scale, that relates to a minor seventh, a minor third down. So, for instance, if it's a straight regular 2/5/1 and C major, for that first chord, I would play F6 diminished scale, that thing, and then maybe move to the D flat. The A flat minor sixth. And then maybe the C sixth, and then practice moving top voices and internal voices, borrowing them from the diminished chords, and actually keep you going for about a decade. Cool. Hope that was helpful. Post any questions you might have below. I quite like doing these sessions. Thanks for asking such good questions, even if I sounded a little bit dismissive and just get on with it and play music, for God's sake. Sorry about that accent. I don't know what that was meant to be.